This year saw them gradually transform into a piece of infrastructure, with China emerging as a strong competitor in the race for space transport vehicles.
SpaceX built something nobody else could touch. A rocket that flies, lands, and flies again. The world watched in disbelief. Experts said nobody would catch up for decades. They were wrong. Something is rising in China. It is moving faster than anyone expected. Is SpaceX's greatest advantage about to disappear? And how did China move this fast without anyone noticing? This is the transformation of the space race. The advantage everyone thought was untouchable. For almost a decade, one company completely changed how humans think about rockets. Before SpaceX, rockets were treated like disposable cups. You used them once, and that was it. The entire machine, engines, fuel tanks, all of it, fell into the ocean after every single launch. Building a new rocket for every mission cost an enormous amount of money. Sending anything into space was so expensive that only governments and giant organizations could afford to do it. Then, SpaceX changed everything. When the company successfully landed the first stage of its Falcon 9 rocket back on a launch pad, people watching the live stream could not believe what they were seeing. A rocket had flown into space, separated from its payload, flipped itself around, and floated gently back down to Earth, landing perfectly on 4 legs like something from a science fiction movie. The impact was immediate. If a rocket could land, it could be refueled and launched again. That single idea cut the cost of reaching orbit dramatically. SpaceX began flying the same boosters over and over, sometimes more than 15 times on the same rocket. Nobody else in the world could do this. Not Russia, not Europe, not Japan. Every other country watched from the sidelines while SpaceX pulled further ahead. Most experts believed it would take a very long time before anyone came close. The technology was too complicated. The gap felt permanent. Many people inside the space industry stopped asking when someone would catch up. They assumed nobody would, at least not for a very long time. But that assumption quietly started to crack, because on the other side of the world, engineers had been watching every SpaceX landing very carefully. They had been studying the technology, building the factories, and training the teams. And they had been working on something that most people in the West had not taken seriously yet. What they were building was not supposed to arrive this soon, and the company behind it was one that barely anyone outside China had heard of. The rocket that wasn't supposed to arrive this fast. Not many people outside the space industry had heard of Landspace before this story began. The company is based in China and was founded less than 10 years ago. Compared to SpaceX, which had already launched dozens of missions and built a global reputation, Landspace was young and relatively unknown. The company had already built a rocket called Zhuge 2, which became the first methane-fueled rocket in the world to successfully reach orbit. That alone was a major achievement. But what came next surprised almost everyone. Landspace engineers began designing a far more ambitious rocket. They called it Zhuge 3, or JK3. From the very beginning, this rocket was not designed to be thrown away after one use. It was built around one core idea: land itself, get prepared for flight again, and launch a second time. This is called vertical landing reusability, and until recently, only SpaceX had truly mastered it. What made the space community pay attention was not just the design, it was the speed. Normally, building a reusable rocket takes many years. Engines must be tested thousands of times. Control systems must be perfected. The rocket has to learn how to slow itself down from enormous speeds and touch the ground without tipping over or exploding. These problems are incredibly hard to solve. But Landspace appeared to be moving at a pace that made no sense by normal standards. Engineers who follow the Chinese space industry closely began noticing test announcements and development updates appearing faster and faster. Within a remarkably short time, the company had gone from early design work to conducting a 10-kilometer hop test, a controlled flight where the rocket climbs high and then descends and lands itself. The global space community started asking questions. How was this happening so quickly? A design that looks strangely familiar. When the first clear images of JK3 appeared online, engineers around the world started looking very carefully. At first glance, the rocket looked sleek and modern. It had a tall body with landing legs folded at the bottom, just like Falcon 9. The overall shape was familiar. But the more people looked, the more they noticed something unusual. This rocket did not borrow ideas from just one SpaceX vehicle. It seemed to take inspiration from two completely different ones at the same time. The lower section looked very similar to the Falcon 9 first stage. Same general proportions, same style of grid fins near the top to help steer it during descent, same folding legs at the bottom to cushion the landing. For anyone who had watched SpaceX landings before, the similarities were easy to spot. But then there was the body material. JK3 was being built using stainless steel. Most rockets use lightweight aluminium to save weight. SpaceX itself used aluminium for Falcon 9, but for its next generation vehicle, Starship, SpaceX switched to stainless steel because it handles extreme heat better. Landspace made the exact same choice for JK3 before Starship had even completed its first successful flight. The engines also told a story. JK3 runs on methane fuel, the same propellant SpaceX chose for Starship's engines. Methane burns cleaner than older fuels and can theoretically be produced on Mars, making it attractive for long-term space exploration. Choosing methane signals that Landspace is not just thinking about today, it is thinking about the future. When word spread that Elon Musk himself had apparently noticed and commented on JK3, attention on the rocket grew even further. The founder of Space, Ixio does not usually acknowledge rival vehicles. The fact that this one caught his eye said something important. But engineers kept returning to the same question. The design choices were interesting. The material selection was smart. Yet none of that explained the part of this story that truly did not add up. Because building a rocket this ambitious should take a very long time. The 2-year rocket. To understand why the speed of JK3 shocked so many people, it helps to understand how difficult building a reusable rocket actually is. This is not like assembling a car. A rocket has to survive conditions that almost nothing else on Earth deals with. During launch, the engines burn fuel at a rate that is almost impossible to imagine, producing heat that would melt most metals instantly. The structure shakes violently. The rocket accelerates from 0 to thousands of kilometers per hour in just a few minutes. Then, for a reusable rocket, the hardest part begins. After separating from its payload, the booster has to flip itself around in the upper atmosphere. It has to restart its engines at exactly the right moment. It has to fight gravity and air resistance while controlling its descent with incredible precision. It has to deploy its landing legs at exactly the right height, and it has to touch the ground softly enough that nothing breaks. SpaceX failed at this many times before succeeding. Rockets fell over. Engines did not restart. Legs did not deploy in time. Each failure was expensive, but each one taught the engineers something new. It took years of painful trial and error before Falcon 9 landings became routine. Landspace appeared to compress that entire journey into roughly 2 years. From the point where serious JK3 development became visible, the company moved through engine tests, structural tests, and a successful hop test at a speed that did not match what most experts would have predicted. The hop test was particularly significant. A prototype booster climbed high into the sky, hovered briefly, then descended in a controlled manner and landed successfully on its legs. Exactly the kind of test SpaceX used years earlier to prove vertical landing was possible. Landspace had done the same thing in a fraction of the time. An orbital launch seemed close. Everything was pointing in one direction, and then, without any warning, the rocket went completely silent. The launch that suddenly went silent. Everything was pointing toward a launch. In the weeks leading up to what appeared to be JK3's first major test flight, the signs were impossible to miss. Airspace restriction notices were filed around the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northern China. These notices are the standard way launch sites tell pilots to stay away from a certain area during a specific time window. When they appear over a launch site, something is almost always about to fly. The space community took notice immediately. Analysts who track Chinese rocket launches began discussing the timeline. Social media accounts dedicated to private Chinese space companies posted updates. Excitement was building. After everything revealed about JK3, the design, the development speed, the successful hop test, people were ready to watch the next big step. Then nothing happened. The launch window came and went. The airspace notices were quietly withdrawn. No rocket flew. No official statement explained why the mission had been delayed. Landspace said very little publicly, and the silence after so much momentum felt deeply strange. Delays in rocket development are not unusual. Almost every major launch vehicle in history has experienced setbacks before its first flight. Thousands of components have to work perfectly at the same time, and a single unexpected sensor reading can stop a countdown cold. These things happen to even the most experienced teams in the world, but the timing raised a specific question. JK3 had built enormous momentum. The hop test had worked. The engines had been tested. The rocket was physically at the launch site. Standing down so close to an apparent launch attempt suggested something specific had changed, a technical problem found during final checks, or perhaps a decision about readiness made higher up. Without an official explanation, analysts filled the gap with careful speculation. Some suggested routine caution. Others wondered if final preparations had revealed something requiring more work. What the delay made clear was simple. Reusable rockets do not forgive mistakes at any stage. But while everyone watched JK3's silent launch pad, almost nobody had noticed what else was quietly developing across China at exactly the same time: the hidden rocket race. While the world was watching JK3, something bigger was happening in the background. China was not running one reusable rocket program. It was running several simultaneously. Different companies, different designs, different timelines, but all chasing the same goal: landing a booster, refueling it, and flying it again. The trick that SpaceX spent years perfecting was suddenly being attempted by multiple teams across China at the same time. One of the most significant names in this hidden race is Space Pioneer, a private Chinese rocket company building a vehicle called Tianlong-3. Like JK3, it is designed from the ground up to be reusable. Its booster is meant to return to Earth and land vertically after every launch. Space Pioneer had already demonstrated serious capability with earlier rockets, and Tianlong-3 represented the company's biggest leap forward yet. Then there is the longer established side of China's space program. The Long March rocket family, which has been the backbone of Chinese government launches for decades, is also moving toward reusability. New variants are being planned with recovery and landing in mind. The Long March program has access to enormous resources, experienced engineers, and deep institutional knowledge built over many years. What makes this situation unusual is that all of these programs are moving forward at the same time. In most countries, a single reusable rocket project would be considered a major national undertaking. China is pursuing several in parallel, across both private companies and its state-run space industry. This parallel approach has a powerful effect on development speed. When multiple teams race toward the same goal, each pushes the others to move faster. Competition within a country can drive progress just as powerfully as competition between countries. There is also growing infrastructure supporting all of this activity. Launch facilities, testing grounds, and manufacturing capacity across China have been expanding rapidly. Each new company entering the market benefits from this shared foundation. For anyone watching from outside, the picture is striking. This is not one challenger preparing to take on SpaceX. It is an entire ecosystem of challengers moving at once. China's space industry is growing at lightning speed. To understand why so many reusable rockets are appearing in China at once, you have to look at what has happened to China's space industry over the past 10 years. The change has been remarkable. A decade ago, China's space program was almost entirely government-run. State-owned enterprises controlled the rockets, the satellites, and the launch facilities. Private companies barely existed in the sector. The idea of a Chinese startup building its own orbital rocket and competing globally would have seemed impossible. That world no longer exists. Starting around the middle of the last decade, China began opening its space industry to private investment in a serious way. New policies allowed entrepreneurs and investors to pour money into rocket startups and satellite businesses. Special economic zones attracted aerospace companies. Universities expanded their space engineering programs. Funding flowed from both private investors and government-backed sources. The result was an explosion of activity. Hundreds of companies now operate across China's space sector, working on everything from small satellite networks to heavy-lift launch vehicles. Some are tiny startups experimenting with new ideas. Others have grown into serious organizations with thousands of employees and modern factory facilities. Landspace and Space Pioneer are two of the most prominent examples, but far from the only ones. Several private Chinese rocket companies have successfully reached orbit in recent years, something only a handful of organizations anywhere in the world have ever achieved. The China National Space Administration shaped this growth deliberately. Rather than treating private companies as competition, it increasingly integrated them into national space plans. Reusable rockets became a specific priority because they directly address the biggest challenge in space access, the cost of reaching orbit. Lower launch costs mean more satellites, better communications networks, and stronger positioning in the global technology economy. For China, reusable rockets are not just an engineering goal, they are a strategic one. There is also a commercial dimension. The international launch market is worth billions of dollars every year. SpaceX currently dominates it, largely because reusable rockets allow competitive pricing. Chinese rockets that match those prices become serious rivals for global contracts. But the most surprising part of China's space ambitions is not what is launching soon. It is what Landspace is already quietly building next, something far larger than anything JK3 was ever designed to be. The even bigger rocket already coming. JK3 is not the end of Landspace's plans, it is only the beginning. Even while engineers are still working to get JK3 off the ground for its first orbital mission, another team within Landspace is already deep into designing something far larger. This vehicle is sometimes referred to by the internal designation GKX, and if the plans come together as intended, it would represent a completely different level of ambition. Where JK3 is roughly comparable to Falcon 9 in size and capability, GKX is aimed at a much higher target. It is being designed to carry payloads that would place it in the same category as SpaceX's Starship, the enormous fully reusable vehicle SpaceX has been developing as its next-generation launch system. Starship is designed to carry more cargo to orbit than any rocket ever built, with both the booster and upper stage returning to Earth after every mission. Landspace's GKX concept pursues similar goals. The rocket would be significantly taller and wider than JK3, requiring far more powerful engines to lift off the ground. Those engines are already being built. Landspace has been developing a new engine called the Lion engine, designed specifically for GKX. Early ground testing has already begun, where engineers measure thrust output, fuel efficiency, and how the engine handles the extreme conditions of ignition and sustained burning. Developing a new rocket engine from scratch is one of the hardest things any aerospace company can attempt. The path Landspace is following looks very familiar. JK3 proves the concept of reusable boosters. GKX takes that concept and scales it up dramatically. SpaceX followed almost the identical progression with Falcon 9 and Starship. If GKX ever reaches the launch pad, it would not compete with Falcon 9. It would compete with Starship itself. But before any of these bigger ambitions become real, one brutal challenge still stands in the way. A challenge that has stopped far more experienced teams than anyone likes to admit. The engineering problem that stops most rockets. Reusable rockets sound simple when described in a single sentence. The rocket launches, drops off its payload, turns around, and lands. Clean, repeatable, elegant. But the gap between that simple description and actually making it happen is one of the hardest engineering challenges humans have ever attempted. Every step in that process contains opportunities for catastrophic failure, and even the smallest mistake can destroy a vehicle worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Start with the heat. When a booster re-enters the lower atmosphere after separating from its payload, it is moving at enormous speed. The friction between the rocket and the air generates temperatures reaching thousands of degrees. The structure has to survive that heat without falling apart. The materials, the insulation, the overall design, all of it has to be exactly right. Getting any of it wrong means losing the rocket before it gets anywhere near the landing pad. Then there is the engine restart problem. After surviving re-entry, the booster has to fire its engines again to slow itself down for landing. But these engines have just survived the violence of launch, the cold vacuum of space, and the intense heat of re-entry. Asking them to restart reliably under those conditions is extraordinarily difficult. Every valve, fuel line, and ignition system has to work perfectly on the first attempt, because there is no second chance. Then comes the landing itself. The booster has to guide itself to a small target, adjust its path constantly, deploy its landing legs at exactly the right moment, and reduce its speed from hundreds of kilometers per hour down to almost nothing in the final second. SpaceX failed at this repeatedly before succeeding. Rockets tipped over, engines cut out too early. Each failure was painful and expensive, but each one taught engineers something they could not have learned any other way. China's rockets will face every single one of these same problems. There are no shortcuts through the physics. The moment that could change the space race. For years, the story of the modern space race had one clear leader. SpaceX built its advantage through years of difficult, public, often painful work. The company failed repeatedly, learned from every failure, and kept going. The result was a launch business so efficient that competitors around the world struggled to keep up. Reusable rockets were the foundation of that advantage, and for a long time, nothing else came close. That foundation is now being tested. China's reusable rocket programs have moved from early ideas to hardware on launch pads faster than most outside observers predicted. JK3 has completed a hop test, sat on a launch pad with airspace cleared above it, and demonstrated that the core engineering is working. Space Pioneer's Tianlong 3 is not far behind, and behind both of them, an entire industry is growing at a pace that shows no sign of slowing. If JK3 successfully reaches orbit and returns its booster to Earth in one piece, the significance of that moment will stretch far beyond a single test flight. It will prove that China's private space companies can execute at the highest level. It will give Landspace the experience to accelerate GKX development, and it will send a clear signal to the entire global launch market that a serious new competitor has arrived. The commercial consequences could be enormous. Launch contracts worth billions of dollars are awarded every year by governments and corporations around the world. Those customers choose their provider based on price, reliability, and availability. If Chinese rockets become reliably reusable, they become genuine alternatives to SpaceX for customers currently with no real choice. SpaceX is not standing still. Its lead is real and substantial, but leads in technology are never permanent. History is full of industries where one company seemed completely untouchable, right up until the moment it was not. The next launch attempt by JK3 or any of its Chinese rivals will be watched with intense interest by engineers, investors, and space agencies everywhere. Because if that rocket climbs to orbit, brings its booster back, and lands it safely on the ground, one question will echo across the entire space industry. Not whether China can compete, but whether anyone was truly ready for how fast it happened.